folks, and welcome to the channel, or welcome back. And in this video we're going to look at the Z3 clunking sound. And all of us that drive a Z3, and if you're watching this video, I am sure that you had this problem or you have that problem. Quite often the Z3s are having a clunking sound in the back of the car, and it's very hard to diagnose where it is. And in this video I'm going to take you through all the possible causes that can create the clunking sound, and there are quite a few of them. I'm going to show you on how you can diagnose it by jacking up the car, blocking a wheel, and then listening where the sound is coming from, because the clunking sound is very hard to locate while you drive the car, because the sound is transposed or transferred through all the metal parts, and often you think it's clunking in the front, but actually it's clunking in the back, or the other way around. Now my car has a clunking problem and I will fix it. So I hope you will enjoy this video. So without any further ado, let's start. Before we do the inspection, you have to remove the exhaust and the heat shield, because otherwise you have no good visibility on the differential nor on the main drive shaft. There is no shortcut in troubleshooting this kind of a problem, because the sound will travel throughout the whole drivetrain, so we need to start isolating it. But first of all, let us have a look at all the areas where we could have that problem. So with the exhaust removed and the heat shield removed, we now have a good visibility on the drive shaft. And the drive shaft is connected to the gearbox with what we call a flex disc. And that could be your first area where you may have a problem. The second area could be the center bearing, where the shaft is sitting in. Or it could be the drive shaft itself, because it has a couple of splines and a couple of U-joints. Here is that flex disc, and as you can see, it's connected with 6 bolts in total. 3 bolts that are tied down to the drive shaft going to the back of the car, and then 3 bolts going towards the gearbox. And this flex disc has to be mounted in a very specific way. If you mount it in the wrong direction, then you're going to have some problems, because the drive shaft is turning counterclockwise. So therefore, these bolts are the ones coming from the actual gearbox. They are pushing that rubber that way. And you want to push on the thickness and not on the thin side. So I've seen this being mounted reverse, and that's going to cause problems. So check that disc if it's mounted in the right direction, and if it's not cracked or broken, or any of the bolts are loose, because that will give you for sure a clunking sound. So if you follow along the main drive shaft, then we have the center bearing, and that one could be wrong. It's held in place with some rubber so it can move up and down, and if that is ripped, obviously you're going to have a clunking sound again. You'll also see a spline and kind of a nut, so make sure that this nut is tight, because that can also cause the problem to be. And of course the spline could be worn out, and that can cause some clunking as well. And on the other side of the central bearing, we actually have the second part of the drive shaft, and this is a U-joint, and even that U-joint could have a problem, so you may have an issue there. And the last part of the drive shaft is actually connected again with a U-joint to the differential. So here you have the differential, but over here you have another U-joint, and that could be faulty as well. So these are all points to be checked. And then finally we need to look at the rear differential. And then at the end you got your differential, which is actually mounted to the chassis with a rubber support here. That's this one here, this big bushing. And that connects to a bracket which is going to the chassis. Often this rubber here is broken, so you might have to join this bushing. And in other cases, more specifically on M types, you will see that the bracket, which is mounted or spot welded onto the cross member here, is actually broken off. So the whole support of the differential is a bit loose, and that can cause clunking. Now the differential itself can have way too much backlash, so that's also something you will have to check. So that's another area that could be wrong. And then finally we have the CV joints which are going to the wheels. We have one on both sides, and these shafts can be faulty as well. They can have a lot of play, and that can also cause clunking. So as you can see, a lot of things can really cause the clunking. So we looked at all the possible areas where you could have too much play or worn out parts, and it's a lot. So all that together can cause the clunking. Maybe it's just one element, but maybe it's a raft of 3-4 elements. So you really need to be very careful when you go in to analyze what is wrong with your car. The way I'm doing this is by jacking up the car and then having a look at all the different components to make sure I don't see any visual problem with it. And then I'm trying to block certain parts, and I'm going to show you that on how I do that, and try to move around. So checking the back lash on the diff. Then I'll check if there is anything wrong on the main drive shaft, specifically on the U-joints or the central bearing. But you've seen that. That looks pretty good in this car. But we still do a little test on that. And then I will block one wheel, and I will have the other wheel free running. And then I will jiggle that around, and I'll see if I can hear this kind of very funny sound or noise, the clunking noise. It's good to do it with two people, so one can actually move things around and the other one can listen where he sees or hears it, because it's very hard to find it actually. Some of these cars have what we call a limited slip differential. And the way to check it is by rotating one wheel in a certain direction, and the other wheels should rotate in the same direction. So I'm going to rotate the wheel which is furthest away in the video towards in the clock direction. And you can see that the other wheel, which is nearest to you in the video, is rotating in the other direction. I'm just going to turn it around. Now I'm going counterclockwise and the other wheel goes clockwise. So this car is having an open differential, so no limited slip. So let's start, and the first thing I'm going to do right now is to put the car in first gear and block the whole thing and move these wheels around a bit in the back. They are now free. You can jack up the car, you don't need to have a lift for that. Of course it's easier. And then listen if you hear any kind of sounds. So let's do that first. So the first test for me is move those two rear wheels at the same time, forward or backward, and have actually the gearbox into first gear. Sounds very familiar, doesn't it? And it's very hard to tell where it's coming from. But if you look closely to the drive shaft going to the gearbox, there is very little movement there. Now I'm going to try to hold one wheel and move the other. Now I can hear sound in my differential. Let's try the other way around. And I have some sound as well. So it's still not determined where it is, but for sure I can hear the clunking. So let us check now first of all the front rubber and then the main bearing and see how good that is. But we kind of done that already, but still we still do it again. And then we're going to do another test, checking this U-joint out, or that U-joint, making sure that there's no play on that. And then we'll check the diff backlash. And then finally we will do the CV joints and check those out. So look on the disc now, and I'm going to move around both rear wheels and we'll see what happens with the disc. It's not moving a lot, but you can hear the sound. So I think this flex disc is quite alright, and I did an inspection on that before, so just rotate it around and make sure you have no cuts, and then make sure that all these bolts are really tight because they could be loose. So, but I don't see an issue right here on this car, but you may have an issue right there. The next thing I'm going to check is this middle bearing here on the main shaft. And for that I'm going to try to move the shaft up and down and see what happens. And that doesn't look too bad. I think this is still alright. There's nothing wrong with that. So on this test I'm going to pull this shaft down and the other one up, and then I will alternate and listen if I hear anything or feel any play on the U-joint. Can you hear that? So that seems like there is play on the spline or the U-joint. It's hard to tell when it's in there like this. But it's not really a lot, but it might be that I might have to tighten up this nut. But I'm going to take the drive shaft out anyway, and then we'll see. The next test, the next joint is the one going to the differential, coming actually from the shortest part of the drive shaft, main drive shaft. And that's connected to a flange, and it also has a U-joint. So let's see what this guy is doing. I don't feel a lot of play here. To check that U-joint, I'm going to try to hold the shaft, and then in the other side I use my screwdriver to move that back and forth a bit and see what happens. This slides off. Okay, that's better. And I think I can move that U-joint a little bit. Yep. So that U-joint has a bit of play. It's probably hard for you to see, but I have some play on that U-joint. So I'm certainly going to take it off and then see what the issue is. So for the next test, I'm going to keep the car in first gear, and I'm going to put my wrench on the flange, which is going to the main drive shaft. So keep an eye on this wrench, and I'm going to move the rear wheel slowly back and forth. And let me do that and see both at the same time, so in both directions, and see how much play I have. See how that moves? And that's very minimal. I will now move both wheels back and forth until the wrench moves. So now I'm going to check the complete drivetrain, and I'm blocking actually the gearbox, although it's in first gear, but I don't want to see any effect of the play in the gearbox. So the gearbox is in first gear, and you should have somebody holding this wrench like so and pulling it anti-clockwise direction, so you get no clunking from the gearbox itself, because there's a little bit of play in the gearbox, of course. So I've tied it down, so because I don't have anybody to help me out on this. So now I'm going to go to the back of the car and move both rear wheels and see if I have clunking and where does it happen. All right. So let me move those wheels back and forth, and I can hear the clunking. And that is certainly coming from my differential. So let me move those wheels back and forth. So I'm going to move those wheels back and forth, and I can certainly hear clunking. I'm not sure exactly where it's coming from. It's either the differential or it's this U-joint here. Let me do that one more time. It's hard to tell. I need to put my glasses on to look a bit closer. Well, I can hear the clunking. I just want to make sure I get no clunking from the front here. I can certainly hear the clunking. I almost have the impression that it's the U-joint connecting the drive shaft to the differential. But it might as well be the differential. But that's certainly the clunk I hear. So now I'm going to move one wheel back and forth and block the other one while I still have the main drive shaft blocked at the same time, and listen to the diff and if I hear any noise. So let me do that. Well, that's certainly a lot of noise in the diff. That's a lot of noise in the diff without the shaft rotating. So I think the diff probably has a way too much backlash. So I'm going to lower the car now and then block one wheel on the ground and then lift the other wheel up a bit so we have a normal suspension position, because right now the wheels are hanging down and this is not always the perfect test to do. So now we're going to do the last test and then I need to draw my conclusion on this. So let me lower the car and show you on how we're going to do that test. I'm going to lower the car and make sure that one wheel is blocked, and I'm going to position it on this wooden block here. You can do this with a jack. You don't need a lift for this, so you can jack up the car and then let it lower down again so the wheel rests on this block. I think this should be low enough. Let's see where we can grab it. Oh, I need some oil on this. So now we can rotate the wheel back and forth and see what it does. And again, we have the clunking sound, and maybe I can look underneath and see. Yeah, and that's certainly a bit too much play. So I think this is play on the diff. As you have seen in this video, it's not very easy to identify the problem, and it could be all over the place. On this specific car, I think I have found a U-joint which is kind of like flaky, which is in the back of the drive shaft near to the differential. But also you could see in the last test we've done is that the differential is having a bit of a clunking sound as well, a bit of too much backlash if you ask me. So what I'm going to do with this car is I'm going to take off the drive shaft. I will do a deeper inspection on the U-joints, but I'm certainly going to put up a new flex disc, although the flex disc is good, but since it's all open, it's only 50 euros, you might as well replace it. I also will replace the central bearing, because that's another 60-70 euros. It's not too much, and it's all done in one effort, and just maybe I get the reconditioned or a new drive shaft. I still have to see how bad the U-joints are. I will certainly take out the differential and I will get it reconditioned because it has a little bit too much backlash. Now once all that is done, I am 100% convinced that the clunking will be gone. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in my next one once we've taken out the diff and the drive shaft. Thank you for viewing, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye bye.